A young nurse got married in her scrubs in the courtroom 24 hours later. Her life took a shocking twist. It was exactly 9 a.m. that Saturday morning in Texas when nurse Alina Dawson clocked out of her shift and ran to the courthouse. It was a special day for her, not because she was about to start her much-needed rest after a grueling 36-hour trauma shift, but because she was about to do something even more extraordinary: marry the love of her life. She didn't change, she didn't have time. Her light blue scrubs were wrinkled from the endless rotations, her hair was loosely pinned in a bun, and faint smudges of dried antiseptic still clung to her hands, but she didn't care. The mirror she glanced at before dashing out of the ER bathroom didn't show a bride, it showed a fighter, a woman who had chosen love over perfection. Outside, the sky was a flawless canvas of pale gold and soft breeze. Her sneakers tapped urgently across the pavement as she crossed the street, her heart racing not from fatigue but anticipation. She clutched a small bouquet hastily arranged by her favorite patient's daughter the night before. The flowers barely holding together with a ribbon made from gao. At the courthouse steps, Liam stood waiting. He wore a simple black suit and navy tie, his dark hair slicked back and a nervous smile playing on his lips. He'd been standing there for nearly 20 minutes, checking his watch like a man waiting for something more than just a ceremony. As soon as he saw her, his shoulders relaxed. His bride was here in scrubs with sleepy eyes and a radiant, exhausted smile. But she was here. I was starting to think you fell asleep in an all, Liam joked as she rushed up. I almost did. Alina laughed breathlessly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. But not even death by fatigue was going to make me miss marrying you. They held hands as they stepped inside. The courthouse was nearly empty. No music, no friends, no elaborate just echoes bouncing off clean marble floors, a bored receptionist tapping at her computer, and an elderly bafe sipping coffee. Yet in that sterile setting everything was vibrant, alive with purpose. The judge, a warm-eyed woman in her late 60s, greeted them with a knowing smile. She had seen hundreds of weddings in that room, but something about this couple pulled at her heart. No veil, she teased gently. I ease Alina's scrubs. Alina grinned. Just blood, sweat, and caffeine. The room chuckled. Liam the bafe, even the janitors sweeping the corner behind them. It wasn't traditional, but it was honest. They stood at the front, fingers interlocked, hearts pounding. The judge began as the vows were read. Alina's voice cracked, not from emotion but sheer weariness, yet she meant every word. She promised to love Liam through every shift, every night of hospital calls, every celebration missed because someone else's life needed saving. Liam responded in kind, his voice strong and reassuring. He promised to be her quiet when the world became too loud, her warmth when the night shifts turned cold. The judge looked up from her script and smiled. You may now kiss your bride. And in that moment, under the harsh buzz of courthouse fluorescence, with a janitor and a bafe as their witnesses and no family in sight, Liam gently cupped her face and kissed her like the world had stopped spinning. Applause echoed from behind. Even the janitor clapped. His broom paused mid-A. I guess I'm the first bride in latex gloves, Alina said, laughing. It was imperfect, rushed, spontaneous, but it was theirs, a moment carved not by extravagance but by raw devotion. What no one noticed, what even Alina and Liam couldn't have known, was that they weren't alone. Sitting quietly in the back pew of the courthouse, beneath a wide-brimmed grey hat and behind dark sunglasses, was an older man with sharp eyes and a cane propped against the wooden bench. His suit, though understated, was tailored. His presence, though unannounced, was intentional. Arthur, when he watched the exchange unfold with a stillness that only years of reflection could teach, he wasn't a relative, not a stranger either. Months earlier, he'd been rolled into Alina's trauma unit after a sudden cardiac episode while traveling under an alias, a billionaire in hiding. She had no idea who he truly was, and she never asked. All she saw was a patient gasping for life, and she fought for him with the same fierce dedication she gave every soul on her table. She stayed past her shift, held his hand through the worst night, spoke calmly when machines beeped wildly. When he opened his eyes after surgery, she was there, that image, her face blurry through his hospital tears, stayed with him. Arthur had come to the courthouse that morning not as a guest but as a quiet observer. He read about her wedding in a hospital bulletin board pinned above the nurses' lounge weeks prior, scribbled in a margin, Alina and Liam, May 14th, 9 a.m. County Courthouse. It was enough. He didn't know why he came, he only knew he had to. Perhaps he wanted to see one last time the kind of soul the world didn't deserve, or maybe it was something deeper, a whisper from fate reminding him that some debts could never be paid in money. Alone as Alina and Liam posed for a blurry phone selfie, Arthur quietly slipped out, no words, no introductions, just a nod to a moment he would never forget. Outside, the sun bathed the city in honeyed light, a Saturday morning like any other, yet stitched with something far greater than routine. It wasn't just the birth of a marriage, it was the silent crossing of paths that would soon shake their world, because while Alina and Liam embraced beneath the courthouse columns, hearts full of hope, the clock was already ticking. Something she couldn't feel was hiding beneath her ribs, an invisible shadow that had been growing quietly, waiting for its moment to strike, a twist neither of them saw coming. But for now all was still, all was bright, and in the center of it all stood a nurse in scrubs with her wedding ring pressed over her heart, and the kind of love you don't read about in fairy tales. You live it even if only for a day. It was barely dawn the next morning when Alina's phone rang the hospital's number. Blinked across the screen, she was still curled in bed, her wedding ring pressing lightly into her cheek where she had fallen asleep. Her husband Liam stirred beside her, murmuring something incoherent, his arm instinctively reaching for her waist, but Alina was already up, responding not to the call, but to the oath she lived by. Dawson here, she answered, her voice still scratchy with sleep. We've got a multi-vehicle accident on I-35, said the charge nurse on duty. Trauma is getting hit hard. We're down 2 surgeons. Can you come? Alina didn't hesitate. Give me 20 minutes. She showered quickly, pulled on a clean pair of scrubs, and kissed Liam on the forehead. He mumbled, "You're incredible. You know that." With a sleepy smile, she didn't reply, not because she didn't feel it, but because her throat tightened with something strange, an ache, not in her heart, not yet, but a deep fatigue she'd been dismissing for weeks. It felt heavier that morning, but there was no time to dwell. People needed her by 6:15 a.m. She was back under the hospital's harsh lights, hair tucked into a surgical cap, gloves snapped on the air, buzzed with urgency. Gurney rolled through the double doors, patients screaming, blood-soaking sheets, doctors barking orders. This was her world. This was where she thrived. She scrubbed in for the 3rd trauma of the morning, a young man impaled through the abdomen. Routine for her, controlled chaos. Her gloved hands moved like choreography, scalpel clamp, suction. She was deep in the zone, the room narrowing to just her and the patient. A nurse handed her an instrument, and Alina's fingers fumbled slightly odd. She blinked, refocused. A second later, her vision shimmered like sunlight on water. The room tilted, not dramatically, but enough, a whisper of dizziness. She tried to shake it off, but the fog didn't lift. It thickened, and then came the sound of sharp ringing, followed by the most disorienting silence. Alina's knees gave out, the tray clattered to the floor. Instruments scattered, monitors beeped in confusion. Her colleagues gasped as she collapsed across the sterile tiles. Her body fell in slow motion, slumped like a marionette with its strings cut. Alina. Someone screamed. The attending surgeon rushed around the table, gloves bloody. Get a crash card in here now. Panic erupted. The trauma room, once under tight control, descended into chaos, but this time it wasn't for a stranger, it was for one of their own. Alina's pulse was faint, her breathing shallow. A nurse knelt beside her, shaking her gently. Her eyes fluttered, dull, unfocused. Pulse 38. She's bradycardic. They wheeled her out of the OR like she was any other critical patient, but it wasn't any other patient. It was Alina, the one who never asked for help, the one who stayed past her shifts to sit with dying grandmothers, the one who missed her own bridal shower because she was holding the hand of a young boy in recovery, and now she lay unconscious in ICU, a machine doing what her heart no longer could. The staff moved with quiet urgency. No one could meet each other's eyes. The ER had been built on her back, and now it felt like it might collapse. Without her, Liam arrived 30 minutes later. His face was pale, his shirt on backward. The nurse who called him said only, "Come quickly." No one told him what to expect. He pushed through the ICU doors, expecting maybe exhaustion, maybe dehydration. What he saw instead shattered him. Alina hooked to a ventilator, tubes everywhere, the rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor too slow, too weak. A doctor pulled him aside gently with a kind of face you never want to see. "Mr. Dawson, I'm afraid it's serious." Liam's voice cracked. "She was fine yesterday. We just got married." The doctor nodded solemnly. "We ran initial tests. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. Her ECG is abnormal. We're seeing signs of restrictive cardiomyopathy, a rare heart muscle disease. It appears genetic, but undiagnosed." Silent until now. Liam blinked. "What does that mean?" The doctor sighed. "It means her heart is stiffening. It can't pump blood properly. There's no fix. Not unless we find a donor heart." And fast. The word slammed into Liam like a freight train. "But she's 26. I know it's rare, but not impossible. Sometimes the signs stay hidden for years." Fatigue, shortness of breath, occasional dizziness. Liam's mind reeled. He remembered their honeymoon planning, how Alina had said she didn't care where they went as long as there were quiet nights. He remembered her rubbing her temples during long days and chalking it up distress, the little things that never seemed like warnings. Until now. "She needs a transplant," the doctor repeated. "We've already added her to the national registry, but her blood type is O negative. Matches are rare. We're doing everything we can." Liam stood frozen outside the ICU room. He watched the love of his life lying still, her chest gently rising and falling with machine-assisted breaths. Just yesterday she was laughing about latex gloves and weddings without veils. Now she was fighting for her life, and she didn't even know it. The staff rotated in and out, silently checking vitals, adjusting drips. Some left small notes by her bed, sticky pads that read, "You've got this and come back soon, M." It wasn't protocol, but this wasn't a protocol day. By nightfall, the news had quietly spread through the hospital. The nurse who saved everyone was now the one who needed saving. The nurse's station was unusually quiet. The vending machine sat untouched. Even the janitor paused longer outside her room. Inside, Liam held her hand. "I don't know if you can hear me," he whispered, his voice trembling, "but I need you to wake up. You don't get to leave me. Not now, not the day after we said forever." Alina didn't move, but the monitor beeped on slow and steady, the sound of borrowed time. Elsewhere across town, a man watched the local hospital news bulletin update on his tablet. A familiar name popped up on the critical list. Alina Dawson status Urgent transplant required condition, cardiac. Failure. Arthur Wynne didn't blink. His wrinkled hand rested on the edge of the screen. His breath slowed. He remembered her face. He remembered what she did for him, not because he was rich, not because she knew who he was, but because she believed every life was worth fighting for, and now someone needed to fight for hers. But that story hadn't begun yet, for now the world remained suspended. The girl who always stayed on her feet now lay still, and all the monitors blinking softly in the sterile dark echoed the same haunting truth. Time was running out. The city stretched below him like a sleeping machine, a mosaic of headlights, blinking antennas, and lives being lived. But from his penthouse on the 77th floor, Arthur Wynne wasn't thinking about any of it. He was still picturing the scene from yesterday morning. A young woman in light blue scrubs, smiling despite the fatigue in her bones, her voice steady as she joked about latex gloves and courthouse vows, her groom eyes full of wonder. The judge, warm, amused, the small strange magic of a wedding that didn't need chandeliers or flower petals to feel sacred. The moment he saw the bulletin pinned in the hospital hallway a week ago, Alina and Liam, County Courthouse, 9 a.m., he knew he would be there. Arthur never forgot the people who saved him, especially not her, and now just one day later her name had appeared again. This time not on a wedding bulletin board, but on a digital red strip flashing across the bottom of the hospital's critical care dashboard. ICU status: Alina Dawson, urgent transplant. Required cardiac failure. He stared at the screen in disbelief, the name pulsing like an alarm. It didn't make sense. She was young, vibrant, a force in motion. He'd just seen her vow her life to someone, a heartbeat full of promises. How could she be dying now? Arthur sat in stunned silence, the leather of his chair creaking under his shifting weight. Then with slow intention he reached for his phone and called his private physician, Dr. Chong. Arthur said calmly, "It's time." There was a pause on the other end, a quiet breath. Dr. Chong had been waiting for this call for months. "You sure?" the doctor asked. Arthur turned back toward the window. "I was tracing the lights below. She saved my life without knowing who I was. Now she needs a heart. If mine fits, I want her to have it. But you're still lucid, stable. You could have weeks." "No," Arthur interrupted. "I don't want weeks. I want to use whatever I have left to rewrite something worth remembering." The billionaire tech genius had built his empire on algorithms, predictions, and control, but mortality had no code, and this was the only legacy that mattered now. He'd known for almost a year that the cancer was terminal, pancreatic stage 4. He kept it quiet, as he did with everything. No press releases, no sympathy, just a slow, methodical dismantling of a life's empire behind closed doors. He had prepared it all: medical directives, legal permissions, a private transplant network funded under the Wynne Foundation, surgical teams on standby. But there was one line in the document he'd always left blank: the recipient's name. Until now he glanced at the wedding photo he'd snapped discreetly on his phone the day before. Alina laughing, Liam holding her hand. The judge mid-smile. It wasn't fair, but life rarely was. He stood slowly and walked into his private study, where papers waited for his final signature. One by one he reviewed them calmly, as if going over code: medical release, organ donation, authorization, transfer of wealth, final will. Then he took out a blank sheet of paper and began writing by hand a letter. Not to the world, just to one person: to the nurse who gave me time. The ICU lights never dimmed. They hummed like ghosts above Alina Dawson's bed, casting pale shadows over her motionless body. Machines surrounded her like sentinels, each beeping and blinking in its own rhythm, artificial sounds mimicking the heartbeat that once pulsed so naturally within her. But now even that rhythm was faltering. It had been only 36 hours since Alina collapsed in the or 36 hours since she fell forward mid-procedure, her blue scrubs standing against the sterile floor as doctors screamed her name. 36 hours since her young husband Liam had arrived to find the love of his life unresponsive, hooked to tubes and slipping away. The diagnosis hit like a bullet: restrictive cardiomyopathy, rare, genetic, and deadly. Without immediate transplant, now every hour that passed was a countdown. Every second that ticked forward was one she might not survive. Liam sat slumped in the same chair beside her bed, arms crossed over his chest, trying to stay awake, trying to keep breathing. He hadn't left, not even once. His suit was wrinkled from their wedding day. He hadn't changed. His eyes were swollen. The nurses brought him coffee, but it went cold, untouched on the tray table. Hope had begun to blur into denial into dread. Doctors shuffled in and out, exchanging glances behind clipboards. At first they offered reassurances, medical-sounding words designed to sound like control, but as the hours passed those reassurances became gentler, softer, vaguer. Dr. Ramirez entered the room just after midnight. Her expression taut. "We've contacted every center in the country," she said. "She's officially on the transplant registry." Liam stood, voice cracking. "So we wait." Dr. Ramirez hesitated, her heart, "It's failing faster than we anticipated. O-negative donors are already rare, but combined with her physiology, her heart slightly smaller than average. Even if a match is found, it would have to be nearly perfect." "What about an artificial heart?" he asked. "We considered that. The issue is time. The surgery, prep, recovery, tissue response. It's not something we can do safely at this stage." Liam gripped the metal bar of Alina's bed. "There has to be something, someone. We're reaching out to global Network, she added quickly. There's a new compatibility system being trialed in Sweden. It's cutting edge but unapproved. There's also a program in Israel that uses rapid genomic mapping to reduce rejection rates but transporting a heart. From abroad, the viability window is short, risky. A tense silence fell. Liam looked at his wife's face, her brow soft, her lips dry, a tear dried on her cheek. From some dream she'd never describe, how could she be this still? The girl who never sat down, who answered calls at midnight, who worked doubles to cover co-workers' emergencies, the nurse who made time for everyone, now had none. He buried his head in her blanket and whispered, "Please and please hang on." Miles away across the city skyline, inside a private high-rise built like a fortress, Arthur when stared at a set of final documents laid out on polished mahogany. The room was quiet but tense. His assistant Daniel stood a few feet behind him, barely breathing. On the table sat Arthur's estate binder, a sleek black folder with silver tabs, each one bearing a single word: assets, trusts, directive, organ donation. Arthur's hand shook slightly as he flipped to the final page, the last blank one, a single line, waited for his signature. Once signed, there would be no going back. He picked up the pen. Years ago, Arthur built software that predicted world markets to the decimal. He cracked algorithms that changed economies, anticipated pandemics, revolutionized communications, but he couldn't outcode death. His diagnosis came like a thief in the night. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The prognosis was cruel and definitive. He'd fought for a time trial, drugs, private treatments, but he knew better than to bargain with fate. Instead, he turned to something he could control: how it ended and who it saved. He stared at Emily's name on the tablet. The hospital's daily board had updated minutes earlier. Condition critical, priority 1, time remaining 48 to 72 hours. Daniel stepped forward gently. "Sir, are you certain you want to do this?" Arthur didn't look up. "She didn't know who I was," he said quietly. "She had no reason to stay by my bed that night, but she did." I could barely speak, and she just held my hand. Daniel shifted. "There are other ways to give back: your foundation, your endowments." Arthur's voice cut through. "This is the only way that matters now." Daniel said nothing. He had served Arthur for 20 years, had seen him conquer empires, fall from grace, rise again, burn and rebuild, but he'd never seen this version of the man, vulnerable, human, full of conviction and ready to go. Arthur signed. The final stroke of ink was slow, deliberate. It was done. The transfer of his estate, the medical directive, the order to mobilize the transplant team, all activated in one moment. A private team had been on standby for weeks now. They were in motion. Arthur turned toward the large window behind him. The city shimmered. "She gave me time," he said softly, almost to himself. "Now it's hers." Daniel stepped forward. "The team will be here in an hour." Arthur nodded. He didn't fear death. He had seen too many men waste away waiting for one more tomorrow. But Alina hadn't even begun to live. She was a nurse, a wife, a dreamer. The world needed her more than it ever needed him. The sun had barely risen when Arthur Wynne took his last breath. He was alone but not abandoned. He had dismissed his staff hours earlier with a calm "thank you for everything." His private suite was dim, music low, the soft strains of an old jazz record echoing through the quiet. The final documents sat signed and sealed on the desk, and a fresh set of coordinates had been sent to the medical transport team parked on standby in a hangar just outside of Austin. Arthur didn't want fanfare. He wanted peace, and in the final minutes it came. A slow, drifting release. His chest stopped rising. The lines on the monitor stilled. No alarms, no resuscitation efforts, just silence, the kind that honors a man's last wish without disturbance. Within 40 minutes, the Wynne Foundation's contingency plan was activated. A secure phone line buzzed to life. "Yes," said the director, listening carefully. "It's confirmed. We're clear to move." On the edge of a tarmac far from the nearest commercial airport, a matte black helicopter roared to life. Unlike commercial medevac choppers, this one wasn't owned by a hospital. It belonged to Arthur's private fund, created and financed years ago for emergencies he hoped would never come. Inside it was custom outfitted with surgical-grade refrigeration units, medical supplies, and a 3-person transplant crew trained to execute under pressure. Today's mission was different. It wasn't for Arthur. It was because of Arthur. In the cargo bay set a small white container glowing under internal LED lights stamped in bold black, priority, human organ, Alina Dawson. A silver envelope rested on top, a name handwritten and clean, deliberate strokes: Liam Dawson. The flight path bypassed all commercial routes. The Foundation had already cleared the airspace with emergency permissions under Arthur's end-of-life directive. Even air traffic control had questions they couldn't answer. Only instructions: authorize, approach, no delay, prepare. He helipad back at St. Annabel's Medical Center. The staff was just beginning to shift into their morning rotations when the alert came through the hospital's overhead system: attention, emergency inbound medevac, prepare, rooftop helipad, all non-critical flights diverted. Dr. Ramirez already reviewing Alina's vitals for the 10th time. That hour looked up sharply. "Medevac?" she asked the nurse beside her. "We weren't expecting anything this morning. No request logged," the nurse replied. "This came straight from administration, but no one knows what it's about." She frowned and turned toward ICU 4. Liam was inside, still holding Alina's hand, lips moving in a soft murmur. He hadn't slept again. He barely reacted when the light outside the room shifted from morning grey to full gold, but then something strange happened. The building began to hum a deep vibration. Subtle at first, like distant thunder rolling over the roof, then louder, more urgent, the sound of propellers slicing through wind. Liam looked up, confused. Outside the ICU window he could see the helipad at top the opposite wing of the hospital, and now there was something hovering above it, a helicopter, sleek, dark, unlike anything he had ever seen. Before he stood abruptly, eyes wide. What is that? Dr. Ramirez stepped beside him. I don't know. The ICU staff gathered near the hallway window, whispering as the aircraft descended its undercarriage. Tilted, locking to the landing skids as it kissed the rooftop. The moment it touched down, the rear hatch opened. Out stepped 2 men and 1 woman, all in midnight blue uniforms. Eyes focused, voices coordinated. They moved quickly, but calmly, wheeling a secured cooler between them. Hospital security froze. One of the men pulled out a card, handed it to the lead administrator, who had rushed to the rooftop. The emblem on the card was embossed with a Wind Foundation's crest, beneath it a single phrase: organ transfer directive 0417 Win. By the time the staff processed what was happening, the transplant team had already entered the elevator down in ICU. Dr. Ramirez's pager buzzed. Incoming organ transfer match confirmed. O negative. At 1 minute her heart skipped. She stared at the screen, reading it again and again. Is this a joke? She asked. No one in particular, but the disbelief shattered as the elevator doors opened. They came in like precision clockwork. No rush, no panic, just purpose. The lead carrier nodded to Ramirez, then placed the cooler on the sterile receiving tray for Alina Dawson. The woman said. Liam stepped forward. What is this? Where did it come from? The lead medic reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Mr. Dawson, he asked gently. Liam nodded. This is for you from Mr. Arthur. When he stared at the envelope like it was something holy, his hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single note: to the nurse who gave me time. Here's yours. Liam dropped into the nearest chair, unable to speak. He remembered the quiet man in the courtroom, sitting alone in the back row. Just yesterday he hadn't known who he was. Alina hadn't either, but now it all made sense. Arthur Wynne, one of the richest and most private men in the country, had watched their wedding, and within 24 hours he had given Alina the only thing she needed to survive: a second chance. Liam passed the letter to Dr. Ramirez. She read it once, then blinked away tears and nodded. Prep the ore, she said. Called the transplant team. We're going now. The corridor came alive with controlled chaos. Scrub nurses gathered supplies. ICU texts rerouted. Emily's 4 lines. Anesthesiologists were paged. Cardiologists called, and a surgical theater cleared in record time as Alina was wheeled down the hall, still unconscious. Liam followed beside her, not sobbing, not smiling, just believing. The doors of the opened inside. Sterile light bathed the room in white. The transplant team moved into formation. Machines beeped, clamps clicked, suction lines cleared. Outside the viewing glass, hospital staff who had once trained under Alina now stood in quiet solidarity, not as professionals but as people who had been touched by her spirit. The heart, Arthur's heart, was placed into sterile containment, its pulse preserved by precise technology and reverent hands. It was strong, it was viable, it was ready. Dr. Ramirez stood over the patient she had known since residency, her hands steady. Let's bring her back, she whispered, and the transplant began. The operating room had fallen into a reverent hush for nearly 6 hours. No one had spoken above a whisper unless necessary. Every movement was calculated, every breath taken with care. The heart was in Alina's chest, was open, but the impossible had become tangible. Life, fragile and fierce, was making its return. Dr. Ramirez, who had performed countless surgeries in her 20-year career, stood at the head of the table, her gloved hands steady, her eyes unwavering. Beads of sweat clung to her brow under the surgical cap, but she didn't blink. All right, she whispered, let's bring her back. The room tins as the paddles were prepped, charging clear. The first jolt hit, making Alina's body arch slightly. The flat line held again, clear. Another jolt. The screen flickered a moment, past one breathless, suspended moment. Then beep, beep, beep. A murmur of relief rippled across the room. It was faint but steady. She's back, one of the nurses whispered. Dr. Ramirez finally exhaled. Let's close her up gently. No applause, no cheers, just a quiet respect for the miracle that had unfolded before them. A young nurse, dead for all practical purposes, now carrying the heart of a man she once saved, a man who'd watched her wedding from the shadows, a man who had chosen her as his legacy. Alina Dawson lived. The ICU was quiet again. 3 days passed, tubes remained, monitors still blinked. Liam never left. He sat by her bed in a borrowed hoodie, knees drawn to his chest as he watched the pale glow of her face. He'd memorized every inch of her, from the faint freckles under her eyes to the way her fingers twitched even in sleep. Doctors came and went. Her vitals were stable. The heart had taken. There was no sign of rejection, but she had yet to wake until the 4th morning. It was just after 5 a.m. when Liam felt it, the slightest squeeze against his fingers. He jolted upright. He said, voice cracking. Her eyelids fluttered, her head shifted slightly, then her lips parted. Liam, he nearly fell out of the chair. Oh my God, you're awake. Alina blinked slowly, eyes glassy, confused. Her throat was dry, her body heavy. Where? You're in ICU, he said quickly, standing, brushing the hair from her forehead. You're okay, you're safe, you're alive. Alina, she tried to sit up, pain lanced through her chest. Her hand flew instinctively to the source. That's when she felt it, the bandages, the soreness The difference my heart, she whispered. Liam nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. It's not yours anymore, it's new, a transplant. They said it was perfect, a miracle. Her eyes filled. I don't understand. Dr. Ramirez entered. Drawn by the change on the monitors, she stopped short when she saw Alina's open eyes. She's awake, she whispered to the nurse behind her. Then she turned toward the bed with a gentle smile. Hi, Alina. Hi, I imagine you're a little confused, the doctor said, moving to her bedside. You collapsed mid-surgery. We found out you had a rare form of restrictive cardiomyopathy. You were dying, Alina. You had maybe 48 hours left. Alina looked stunned. Her eyes darted to Liam. He gave her hand a squeeze. We placed you on the transplant list immediately, Ramirez continued, but your blood type O negative and the size of your heart made a match nearly impossible. We were running out of time. Alina's lips trembled. Then how? Dr. Ramirez hesitated for a moment, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Liam. You should tell her. Liam unfolded the note and read it aloud, his voice low. Reverend to the nurse who gave me time, here's yours. Alina stared at him speechless. Who? Liam nodded slowly. Arthur went. The name hit her like a thunderclap. She remembered the night the man wheeled into her ER under an alias. She remembered the way his heart had stopped, the hour she spent beside him, refusing to leave his side even when her shift had ended. She remembered his face, so pale, so broken, and how when he woke up he simply whispered, "Thank you." We didn't know it was him at first, Liam continued. But he was at the courthouse at our wedding, quiet, sitting in the back. He must have known then that something was wrong. Maybe he'd already planned this. Maybe he was waiting. Alina's face crumbled. She covered her eyes, sobs breaking free from her chest. Dr. Ramirez touched her shoulder. Gently he passed in his sleep. Peacefully within hours his medical transport team brought his heart here. It was the perfect match, Alina, not just biologically but karmically, as if the universe had written it this way. Alina looked at the ceiling, her cheeks streaked with tears. He remembered me. She closed her eyes. I thought I was just doing my job. You were, Dr. Ramirez said softly, and that's exactly why he remembered. The room fell into quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was sacred inside Alina's chest. Arthur W.'s heart beat steadily, not a metaphor, not a symbol, a reality. A billionaire whose name the world respected, and a nurse whose name he never forgot. Their lives had touched once briefly, but that touch had saved them both. Now kindness lived on, echoing in every beat of a new beginning, and Emily Dawson was awake. It had been exactly 41 days since Alina Dawson's heart stopped on that cold, sterile floor. 41 days since the beat in her chest became the echo of a man she barely knew but had once saved without hesitation. And now she stood in the middle of a half-let hospital wing, surrounded by scaffolding, fresh paint, and something even more profound, legacy. The banner above her read, the Arthur Wynne Memorial Center for Critical Nurses, funded entirely by the estate of a man most of the world had never seen in public for decades. The center was a quiet monument, not just to medical care but to the quiet acts of humanity that often go unseen, like a nurse holding a stranger's hand at 2 a.m. because no one else would. Alina wasn't in scrubs today. She wore a modest navy blue dress, her long hair brushed and pinned neatly, her skin still slightly pale from recovery, but the soft glow of resilience lit her face, and her hands, one resting gently over her heart, trembled with gratitude, not weakness. Beside her Liam stood with pride, holding her hand as if letting go might cause the world to spin off balance again. The suit he wore was sharp, clean, but his eyes, they were all her. Every flicker, every glance, every smile, they lived and died in her presence. Media cameras flashed like fireflies along the corridor. Reporters stood pressed against velvet ropes. The hospital had arranged a small press conference to unveil the project, but the story had already gone national. Billionaire's heart saves nurse who once saved his life. It was everywhere. Talk shows, podcasts, medical journals. They called it a miracle, a karmic loop, a love story. But Alina had always seen it as something simpler, a debt paid in grace. She stepped up to the podium slowly, the microphone adjusted to her height. The crowd hushed, even the construction workers paused. She took a moment, closed her eyes, listened not to the silence but to him, to the rhythm now living inside her chest. And then she spoke. 7 weeks ago I was a nurse on the floor like any other, overworked, running on caffeine, hoping I could make someone's life a little better. I didn't know that mine was hanging by a thread. She paused, looking out at the crowd. Then I woke up with a stranger's heart inside me, except he wasn't a stranger at all. A ripple moved through the room. Arthur Wynne was one of my patients. I didn't know who he was, only that his pulse was fading and that I had to help. That's what we do as nurses. We don't ask for last names, we don't ask what you're worth, we just fight. She turned slightly, gesturing toward the glass wall behind her. It opened into a sunlit atrium where a massive oil painting had just been mounted, a portrait of Arthur seated in a leather chair, the cityscape behind him, and a quiet warmth in his eyes. He looked nothing like the public imagined, not cold, not stoic, but real. I didn't know he would remember me. I didn't know he would be there the day I got married, and I didn't know he would give me this. She pressed her hand gently to her chest again, but now I do. Her voice grew soft, almost like a whisper. I carry him with me, not just in biology but in purpose, in silence, in sacrifice. The sinner you see around you isn't about Arthur. When the Billionaire, it's about the idea that kindness echoes that even the quietest moment, the smallest mercy can change. Everything. The applause came slowly, almost as if people were afraid to break the moment, but then it swelled a storm of hands and claps and cheers that filled the new wing like music. Alina stepped back, cameras flashed, reporters yelled questions. She couldn't hear. The hospital director offered her a hug, but her eyes, they stayed fixed on that portrait. Later the formalities ended, the tour moved into its final stretch, and only a few people lingered behind. Liam stepped away to speak with a journalist, and Alina, heart still fluttering with nervous joy, found herself alone in the atrium with Arthur. She stepped closer to the painting. The light hit it just right. His eyes, those deeply set eyes, seemed to follow her, not hauntingly but patiently, kindly, as if still waiting to hear how her shift had gone. She smiled. "Hey," she whispered, "you made it." Her fingers grazed the base of the canvas where bronze plaque had been installed. It read, "In memory of Arthur, when he gave time back to those who give their lives to others." Alina stood there a long moment. No tears, just stillness, gratitude, a quiet rhythm in her chest, the same one that had once beat inside a man the world barely knew, but whom she would never forget. A documentary team from a local news station quietly filmed from a distance. They had been granted exclusive access to her story, and as Alina rested her hand over her heart, once again the narrator's voice began to rise over the final footage. "You never know whose life you'll save," the voice said gently, "or whose heart you'll carry." And with that, the screen faded to white. A pulse could still be heard, steady, strong, eternal. Alina's pulse, Arthur's gift, full circle. If you enjoyed this powerful story of sacrifice, kindness, and destiny, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life inspired narratives that move the heart and stir the soul. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you feel as Alina Dawson stood beside Arthur W.'s portrait, carrying not just his heart but his legacy? What moment struck you the most? The courtroom wedding, the collapse, the helicopter arrival, or the emotional awakening? Share your reflections in the comments below. Mention any part of Liam's devotion or Arthur's final act that truly touched you. Rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10 and let us know, was this ending what you expected? Would you have done the same if you were in Arthur's position? Also let us